Pull up a chair, guys, because you and we need to have a talk. In July 2022, I was on vacation in Vienna. Yeah, that's right. I went to Austria, right before I came to Australia. Although I sort of visited Australia while I was in Austria too. Anyway, I still remember scrolling through the news every day and seeing all these articles about wildfires around the world. I even counted them. In the 5 days I stayed in Vienna, there were a total of 18 separate articles on wildfires, 6 of them on California. And sure, I'm paying more attention to the topic right now than I did before, but I'm sure this was more than usual. So in this lesson, I want to give more context about this phenomenon and help you understand that this is, indeed, a pattern. Wildfires are becoming more frequent and more dangerous than they ever were. At the base of this is one major player: climate change. Yep, there it is again. I could probably make a 1-hour lesson about climate change, but that's not the goal of this lesson. So, I'm just going to generalize climate change for this situation. Climate change usually refers to the changes in weather conditions that are caused by human activity. We also call that anthropogenic activity. The general trend of this weather change is that the temperature is increasing. In other words, global warming. This global warming causes more unusually hot days and heat waves, as well as more droughts. But at the same time, higher temperatures cause more evaporation, and warmer air can hold more water, leading to higher rainfall. So, the overall effect of climate change is that warm and dry conditions become even warmer and drier, while weather conditions become even more wet. So, how do these conditions affect wildfires then? Let's start with the wet season. Normally you'd say weather conditions are good to prevent wildfires. Firefighters directly use water as a fire extinguisher, and wet fuels burn less easily than dry fuels. However, water also makes plants grow, which means more burnable fuel and more risk of large fires in the future. So indirectly, wetter conditions will increase fire risk in the long run. Talk about adding fuel to the fire. And now, summertime. In the summertime when the weather is high. The hot and dry conditions that we experience during summer are becoming even more hot and dry because of climate change. In other words, there are and will be more unusually hot days like we experienced in the summer of 2022. And this is also not limited to summer. In California, one of the most fire-affected regions in the world, we're also seeing an increase in unusually hot days in autumn, creating even more fire risk year-round. The consequence. The fuel that was amassed from the high rainfall will dry out in warmer and drier conditions, and there's the danger. Dried out fuels burn much easier than wet fuels. American scientists discovered that fuel drying caused by global warming is the clearest link between climate change and increased wildfire activity in California. The result of fuel drying? Higher fire risk. And this has several consequences for fire regimes around the world. Scientists from the University of Melbourne discovered that fire regimes in Southeast Australia will shift in the future. These shifts are characterized by increased fire extent and fire intensity, and a decreased fire frequency, meaning they'll happen more often. Okay, well, so what if more large wildfires happen? What is the consequence of that? So, we've covered before in these videos that plants and animals in fire-prone ecosystems have lived with fires for millions of years, and they have developed adaptations to survive fire. True, but not specific enough. What the flora and fauna are really adapted to is the fire regime, so how often it burns and how intense. This can differ between regions. Plants in California may be adapted to different fire regimes than plants in Australia. So when these fire regimes change as a result of climate change, the plants will have to adapt to these new fire regimes. However, the change is happening so fast that it's simply not possible for these plants to adapt to the new fire regime. You have to understand Plants have developed their adaptations to their fire regime over the course of millions of years. Since 1984, forest fires around the world have more than doubled. That was only 40 years ago. Projections are showing that fuel drying, driven by climate change, is decreasing forest resilience. That's the amount of resistance a forest can apply to a sudden change. If the resilience is low and the change is strong enough, this may lead to permanent change in forest structure and plant composition. What's more is that low resilient forests are more vulnerable to burning again, which can also impact tree regeneration and composition. In other words, we may lose our forests. And with the loss of our forests, we will lose all the services that the forests provide for us. The timber, from which we make the furniture you use every day. The drink water from your tap, which we get from forest water catchments. Or what about the recreational and cultural value of the forest and all its inhabitants? And if you thought climate change was done there, I think you should take a seat for this one. Because so far climate change related to wildfire has mainly been caused by anthropogenic activities, so by us. However, there will be a point where the climate will set in motion a self-destructing cycle that we won't be able to stop anymore. We call these points climate tipping points. Intenser fires caused by climate change will increase heat transfer in the air, also known as pyroconvection. Australian scientists predicted that the course of climate change is going to increase pyroconvection in southern Australia, a region already prone to wildfires. What that really means is that the air around there gets hotter. And one of the direct effects from this? More thunderstorms. In other words, more ignitions, and so, more fire. And that's the self-destructing cycle of fire we enter if we exceed that climate tipping point. So, what are we gonna do about it? First off, we need to make sure that we don't reach that climate tipping point, because after that, all we can do is just stand and watch. Well, we can prevent wildfires with the right management for sure, and that will be the subject of our next lesson. But to really stop this cycle, we need to address the roots of this problem. And there it is again. Climate change. We need to contain climate change and prevent the temperature from rising above that 2 degrees. Small note, I originally wanted to say 1.5 degrees, but unfortunately, it might already be too late for that. We need to become more sustainable and reduce our waste and our dependence on fossil fuels. But it starts with small decisions. Try to reduce your energy consumption around the house. Wash your clothes with cold water sometimes. Don't shower too long. Not just nice for the climate, but also walk or cycle more often. Or consider using public transport. And try to eat less meat if you aren't already. And maybe even consider working in an environment like me. A strong message for such a short video. Of course, there are so many more aspects to consider, but it's impossible to cover that in such a short time. Still, I hope that within the short amount of time for this lesson, I've made the message clear about the dangers of climate change in relation to wildfire.